What's up, everybody? It's your boy. Do you ever wonder how certain facts are discovered and the weird implications of them? Like, for example, I read that a gorilla can lift up to 1,763 pounds. Does that mean that they had a gorilla pick things up at increasing weights of 1 pound 1,763 times? And what happened when it tried to lift 1,764 pounds? Did it die? Did the bones in its arms collapse? How do they know that the gorilla just didn't feel like working that hard? Did they ask him? AKA Reed from Shameless Nerd. Okay, one real quick announcement. Thanks to the absolutely unbelievable response to my first few videos, I have now become eligible for monetization on this YouTube channel, which I never thought was even a possibility. I am a single parent of a 3-year-old and am a public middle school teacher by trade, so this is pretty huge for me, and I am still just in awe, and I am so incredibly thankful for you guys. So because of this development, if you would like to support the channel, the best way to do that would be to click the join button down below and become a member. There are 2 tiers. The first tier is basically just saying like, hey, I want to support what you do, and it's $3 a month, and it gets you some little stickers that I made that'll be by your name in the comment section, and you'll get to see my new videos a couple days early, which is also pretty cool. These are the dweebs, and that's the first tier. The second tier is called the nerds, and the nerds get all the stuff that the dweebs get, and for only $5 instead of $3, you also get access to the new Shameless Nerd Discord channel where we can chat and gather a group of super elite nerds to eventually aid in my takeover of the planet, and you'll get to be a part of polls that help to decide stuff for the channel, like what future videos will be about, stuff like that. Again, thank you guys so much for the genuinely unfathomable outpouring of support for these first few videos and our growing, overwhelmingly positive and non-toxic comment section and community that we're building here. Very, very, very cool. I am extremely thankful, and that is an understatement. Okay, on to the video. Dying sucks. I would know. I'm dead. Imagine how eerie that's going to be to watch like 80 years from now. But seriously, the fact that we are burdened with the definitive knowledge that our existence is finite, that the only thing we all have in common is that we will all cease to exist one day, sucks. That's really hard. I'm going to die one day. I'm going to not be alive. If you're anything like me, that really sucks to think about. I don't want to let this video get all spiritual and religious-y, so I'll knock that out right now real quick. I think that this idea of dying definitely sucks less if you are religious, and I think that's an inevitable reaction to a discussion of death and a major advertisement point for all of the world's various religions, which kind of makes you think, but regardless, I don't know how to describe my religious beliefs. I'm not even sure I know what they are, but regardless, this video is going to discuss religion only as a historical reality, an aspect of the timeline and how society confronts death. I'm not advocating for or against any religion or lack thereof, and that's not really what this video is even about. This video is about death. For at least like 15 years, humans have died. We live for a while and then we die. We can't escape it. We can't avoid it. We're all gonna die. That's the only guarantee we get. And before you say, what about taxes? You don't have to pay your tax. FBI, open up! Oh! We are the only living creatures on Earth who have to live their lives knowing that they're gonna die. The reason your dog is so happy when you get home, it isn't because he missed you, it's because he's laughing at you. He thinks he's immortal, and we know that we're not. Humans have really struggled with this knowledge forever. Some of the first texts ever written were about death. They're called the pyramid texts. That's how old they are. They're just called the book, basically. And they were written in approximately 2400 BCE. They were essentially spells that were written for the purpose of enabling the dead pharaoh's transformation into an Ak or an Ak, an Ankh, it's pronounced every way you could possibly imagine, AKH, which was like a soul personified intellect thing, but basically it was something that could continue living in the afterlife. For scale, writing was only invented in approximately 3100 BC, so within 700 years of writing even being a thing, writing went from math, essentially, a way to keep records of how much grain was being made, to humans trying to figure out, explain, and manipulate death. We've never been okay with dying. From the moment we became conscious enough to go, oh God, he's not sleeping, we've been terrified of death. Judaism and Hinduism are both believed to have originated around 4000 BC, and before organized religion, all early societies show evidence of attempts to perform rituals or of animistic beliefs, shamanism, ancestor worship. We've always tried to understand death. We've always been, frankly, pretty pissed off that it's going to happen, and we've always tried to figure out how to avoid it. The freaking age of exploration was largely motivated by a bunch of Spanish egomaniacs trying to find the fountain fountain of youth. We don't like dying, but not unlike the ways in which you put all those random items around your house that you can't find a place for into a drawer and try to act like that's an efficient place for them to live long term, and then that drawer eventually gets to a point at which stuff stacks up too high and it catches on the edge of the counter and doesn't close, and then you have to like take everything out and move it to another drawer, buying yourself some time until that happens again. We still know it's coming. We don't like dying, but we can't avoid it. And for most of human history, death was all around us. The average life expectancy for thousands of years was about 25 years. Now, this is slightly misleading because infant mortality was so high, and that skews the numbers. And I'm going to talk about infant mortality rate in a minute, but life expectancy is almost 80 now. Even if you only count people who lived to age 10, the average life expectancy until the 1700s was less than 40. For most of human history, I'm talking until the last 100 years, we died like crazy. This is the most mind-blowing stat to me that I've ever witnessed. I'm going to try to explain it, but I'll link to a Pursuit of Wonder video that does a way better job. But basically, 7% of all humans who have ever lived are alive right now. About 117 billion modern humans have ever lived. About 7 billion are alive today. In the year 1800, there were only 1 billion humans. Only 2,000 years ago, in the year 1 CE, the entire population of humans was only 300 million. Basically, if nearly 10% of the human population ever is alive today, it would make sense to assume that most people existed in the last 100 years, right? Well, this is super not true. In fact, over half of humans who have ever lived, about 60 billion people, lived before the year 100. How is that possible? That makes no sense. Well, guess what? The answer is very simple. It's because we used to die so much. We used to die so much that 60 billion people lived before the year 100, and fewer than 60 billion people have lived since, despite the fact that 7 billion are alive right now. Death was everywhere. Almost half of adults experienced the death of one of their children. 3 out of Abraham Lincoln's 4 children died before he became president. If a child dies now, we get a new nonprofit organization started in their honor. It's a big deal. We just don't die like we used to. And even when we do die, it's different. Before modern medicine and hospitals, literally up until the 1950s, people died at home. You saw it happen. It was in your house. It surrounded you. And then you called the coroner or funeral director or whatever, and they came and got the body. But before that brief period of time, before hospital deaths, but after the advent of the telephone, you did it all yourself. In the 1800s and for the thousands of years before that, you lived with your grandma, she hit the ripe old age of 40, and she died. And then you gathered all your family, you prepared the body, you held the funeral at home, you buried them in the yard yourself by hand. That's where most of our traditions come from. A wake is called a wake because we used to have to wait for up to 4 days to wake the body or make sure that they weren't in a coma and were actually dead. And flowers are part of funerals because they were brought into the house to mask the smell of decaying bodies. People would stop all the clocks in the house at the time the person died and mourn them together, covering the mirrors with black curtains, and you just sat in the death and the darkness and mourning with your family and honored the dead. And then you moved on. And people died of infections from cuts. We had wars in which hundreds of thousands, sometimes millions of young people died, sometimes enough to completely destabilize entire countries' economies. We had the Black Plague, wherein 40 to 60% of the entire population of Europe died. Death was present, tangible, in the day-to-day. And even then, with death all around us all the time, with half of our children dying and funerals in the house and handling dead bodies ourselves, with it so normalized, to use today's terminology, it still absolutely haunted some of the smartest thinkers. Philosophers like 16th century France's Michel de Montaigne spent their entire lives musing about how to deal with death. And to Montaigne, the answer was to obsess about it. To begin depriving death of its greatest advantage over us, let us deprive death of its strangeness. Let us frequent it. Let us get used to it. Let us have nothing more often in mind than death. His thought was that in normalizing death, in thinking about it all the time, we can sort of demystify it and make it less scary, like immersion therapy. But some great thinkers, like Epicurus, thought the opposite, that because death is a state of non-existence, it can't harm us while we're alive, and thus, we shouldn't even think about it at all. And nowadays, we're definitely more like Epicurus than Montaigne. We try as hard as we can not to think about death at all. Most funerals are closed casket celebrations of life where we use terms like passed on or no longer with us instead of even saying the word death. We die in hospitals, fighting the whole way with surgery and medication while we're dying of liver failure at 80 years old, dragging our family's life savings down with us in a pursuit of an extra few months of agony until our still inevitable death. We go our whole lives, most of us, without ever seeing a dead body. Death seems like this faraway, mystical, magical concept, and the closest we ever get to it is Grimm from The Adventures of Billy and Mandy. And yet, I can't stop thinking about it. I wrote a poem the other day that I'm going to self-indulgently allow myself to share here. I can't stop thinking about dying. I lie awake at night, spiraling, lamenting inevitability, and panicking that there may be truth to the myth. I can't stop thinking about dying. I smile at her. She smiles back. Her spoon dipping into a morning parfait, a small, honey-drizzled grain falls to the kitchen floor. We reach to grab it, concerned, naturally, about roaches. I can't stop thinking about dying. April 10th, 2023, my 27th birthday, the first to which I don't look forward. Healthy, young, reasonably happy. I can't stop thinking about dying. With macaroni and cheese on his head, face, arms, neck, feet. How? My son giggles. I can't stop thinking about dying. And a really nice lady at work, 55, her husband just passed unexpectedly. She's missing work now in mourning. I can't stop thinking about dying. The more I try to run from my death, the more I try to stop thinking about it, the more I try to explain it away, the more jokes I make about being the first person to live forever, the more often it creeps up behind me and grabs my train of thought. So, I did a bunch of research into how to stop thinking about death, and every research-backed study and article I could find, every smart person talking about this topic, the advice was the same. You should think about it more. And I grew increasingly frustrated until I finally just considered that maybe they're right. And guess what? They are. And here's why. Number one, thinking about death makes you healthier. One study revealed that, quote, conscious thoughts of death can spark greater fitness and exercise intentions. It also proved that thinking about death led participants to reduce their smoking and even increase intentions to use sunscreen. In another study, women who were death aware were much more likely to get a breast cancer examination. Staying aware of the fact that my life is impermanent makes me subconsciously more likely to make health-conscious decisions. Because it's not like being aware that I'm going to die makes me want to. I don't think anyone is like, damn, man, I'm going to die one day. Well, might as well get this over with. Number two, thinking about death makes you happier. Multiple studies, and I'm linking to all these in the description, have asked participants to ruminate about death or answer questions about death and write their thoughts about the prompts, things like that. And consistently, they report that participants feel, quote from one of them, lower levels of depression, increased positive mood, increased self-esteem, and increased intrinsic motivation. There are conflicting reasons given as to why this happens, but invariably it happens. I think that it's because thinking about death shocks you back to the present. It makes you appreciate right now, moment by moment. That's my theory anyway. Because death is what gives life meaning. Imagine living forever. It might be fun for a while, but eventually, in an infinite existence, every person would experience every single thing that there is, and there would be no demand, no time crunch, no motivation to do anything. Everything would be done. Number three, and this to me is the most important, thinking about death makes you die better. We die like shit. We have been dying for so long, and we just keep getting worse at it. We die surrounded by doctors working their 72nd straight hour in cold, sterile fluorescent light, while our families pace back and forth in waiting rooms, wondering how they're going to refinance the house so they can afford the surgery that just tried to save our lives and failed. Then our families are left to pick up the pieces with no direction. Your grieving husband or wife or your children are then left to go through all of your belongings and argue over who gets what and what's to be thrown away or sold, and then they have to plan and pay for a funeral at a funeral home whose director is preying on their grief and has 40 years experience weaseling grieving people on the worst days of their lives into opting for the super coffin 5,000, which costs an extra $4,000, but it's what daddy would have wanted. And your family says goodbye, teary-eyed, in front of a giant, artificially expensive wooden box in a church you've never attended, instead of to your face. If we hit 75 and we can get comfortable with the idea that we're getting old, that thankfully we won't live forever and we're probably going to die soon, we can avoid all of this. We can prepare ourselves, our families, and our lives, because think about it. Think about dying. What's most important to you? It's your people. No dead person wants the people they leave behind to have a bunch of legal, bureaucratic red tape to jump through as they struggle to recover from the financial fallout of your death while they grieve the loss. 64% of doctors have specific plans of action detailing how to handle life-saving procedures and when to stop trying. Only 20% of the rest of us do. Why? Because they see how shitty it is. They watch every day as people die alone, scared, exhausted from failed surgery after failed surgery, naked, cold in a hospital bed, and they don't want to die like that. No one should. From the ancient humans bargaining with gods that surely don't exist, to Epicurus dedicating his life to death in the 200s BC, to Montaigne's rebuttal and opposite perspective in the 1500s, to the age of exploration and attempts to find the fountain of youth, to the advent of embalming, to Walt Disney having his head frozen just in case, to that tech billionaire injecting himself with his son's blood to try to stay young. We have tried everything that we can think of to deal with death, and despite all of the changes that the world, that the people have undergone, it remains. And for all our improvements, all the great awakenings and enlightenments and scientific revolutions, we've gotten worse at it. And for so long, I let death ruin my life. My anxiety that I've dealt with for so long was a manifestation of a fear of death. My obsession with my pulse and my weight and travel anxiety and drugs and food and all of that self-torture was because I didn't want to die. And for 10 years, I deprived myself of peace and enjoyment of my life because I didn't want to die. And here I am 10 years later, alive, and wishing I had those 10 years back, but simultaneously so appreciative that I will die one day and that the years that I have left matter. Do we need to be Michel de Montaigne and ruminate over death every waking second of the day? Absolutely not. But I tried as hard as I could to run from it for as long as I could, and it only brought me closer to it. Because Epicurus wasn't right either. We shouldn't ignore death. We can't pretend it's not coming. Let the shadow of our death hang over us our whole lives and leave our loved ones to pick up the pieces. We've evolved. We're smarter now, right? How are we so dumb about the only thing we know for sure? There's a better way. There's light at the end of the tunnel, and we can argue about what that light is as we take our final breaths and finally get to see it, or we can gather our things, tell our loved ones goodbye, and get on the train. So get familiar with it. You're dying. We all are. And thank God. Thanks for watching. See you all next time.